Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Spirit and Soul podcast. I am your host, Tiffany Cohen, and today it is my honor to have a man that has been a true mentor in my life for some years now. And I've been a part of, I think, every program that he has, or whatever he's putting down, I'm picking up. And I am just really honored and blessed to have him here with us today. So, Eric Edmeades, thank you so much for being here on the podcast. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to see you, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so happy to have you. Eric, you are someone that I have really been like working with through, I found you through WildFit, and I definitely want to get into all of what WildFit has to offer. It's changed my life. But I want to really allow the audience to hear about about how you got to be where you are with many different businesses and all the different experience that you've had. So please share a little bit about you and how you got here.
Yeah, that's. I guess. I mean, I feel we're going to have one of those like psychological evaluation conversations. Well, I was born in 1970,
That's
but
what we like.
yeah, there you go. I was born in South Africa, and my parents were opposed to the political regime of the time, and so we emigrated to Canada when I was young. I became Canadian at 8. Um, and then I went through sort of some of the typical childhood stuff that one goes through, alcoholism, and then not me, I was a child, but alcoholism in the family and divorce and various things. And I think that I often think that some of the self-determination or some of the um, drive that I sort of developed in my life came from growing up in some level of chaos. And I think that's an important thing to remember because it seems like now we're doing everything we can to make sure our kids have no chaos. I'm like, I don't know. There's a balance that needs to be had there. I'm very convinced that some of the privileges of my life today are because things weren't so easy for me all the time as a kid. I left school not really knowing what I was going to do with my life, and I went into sales. I got a really very hardcore sales job, and that taught me some incredible things. I'm talking, door-to-door sales in Canada in the wintertime. And you learn a lot about yourself and about communication and people by doing that. And then I got involved in, I became the first full-time employee of a tech startup in Vancouver, Canada. And we grew that business to about 150 people before I then went out and started my own business. And I just kind of, in my life, I've just kind of followed my passion and curiosity, and that seems to have led me fairly well. I've always had, I mean, since I was a kid, I've had a deep, driven fascination about human history and evolutionary biology and early human existence. My great grandfather discovered one of the oldest Homo sapiens skulls in history, and so I kind of grew up with that legacy in the family. And then of course I also had some really serious food problems as a kid, and I didn't know they were food problems, but I later found out they were food problems. And when I turned those things around, of course, I became deeply curious about food and nutrition and health. And slowly, I've meandered my way through my entrepreneurial career, where I've had my mobile computing company, and I got involved in doing Hollywood film production and special effects work, where we worked on Avatar and Pirates of the Caribbean and Transformers and some just amazing stuff. But equally, at that same time, we got involved in doing high fidelity medical simulation for the U.S. Army, and that really was truly interesting and fascinating. And then there came a point in time when I finally had to grow up. And what I mean by that is that as a kid, I always thought when I grew up, I might want to be a teacher. And I didn't go that path because, frankly, when I left school, I found out that, at least in Canada, and I can't speak for every country around the world, but it just seems we don't really respect teachers all that much, financially or otherwise. And I decided that wasn't the life that I wanted to create for myself and my family. And I didn't go into teaching. But one day I got this random phone call from Tony Robbins' company asking if I would come and teach business at their seminars. And I wasn't even a speaker at that point, so I was kind of shocked by the invitation. But I went and I loved it. I mean, I had done some speaking previously and I'd enjoyed it a great deal, and I'd worked on my craft, but I hadn't done any speaking for like 2 or 3 years at that stage. And that's when everything changed. I really found my passion for facilitating transformation, facilitating education, and everything I've done since then has been born from that moment. I started WildFit in order to help people change their relationship with food, and I got involved in teaching people influence and public speaking skills, as you know, and entrepreneurship. And those have been my main paying it forward gifts back to the universe.
Yeah. Well, you are definitely paying it forward because really what you offer. And I was thinking about this in the shower actually this morning, as where all my best ideas and insights really kind of come in. And I
I'm going to tell
realized
Kirsty to
that.
I'm going to tell Kirsty to be in the shower.
Don't tell her. um, no, I really started to, I'm like, what is the thread, right? Because interestingly, right, if you look at all of the things that you offer, right, there's WildFit and there's the Speaking Academy and there's Business Freedom Blueprint, which I've taken, and the business courses and the things that you do. And, seemingly, if you look at it at the surface, it's like nutrition and it's business and it's, speaking, and they seem like different things, but I'm like, I feel the thread, right? I can feel the thread between them all, and I get them all. But I started to realize that I think that the thread was not in so much of the content in itself, but it was more about, and what I realized was it was about resilience, and being this almost like survivor, or being the best version of you. And I started to really see how each program that I was in of yours made me a better version of myself. It made me more adaptable in the world, like I can adapt easier. And also I started to think about just like the stories that you've told of your own life, and how you were a survivor and how you were resilient in all of these things. And I'm like, I wonder if Eric realizes this about his programs and how it's received on the other end. Do you see that?
I do. I mean, if you asked me what the thread is, I would say that the thread is driven by my desire to free people. And so if you think about it, I mean, in WildFit, what are we doing? We're freeing people from the grips of the food industry. We're freeing them from addictions, from bad habits, and we're freeing them from foods that control them. But then if we go into, Speaker Nation and Speaking Academy, what are we doing there? Well, we're giving people the freedom to express themselves and to say what's on their mind. And then of course in business freedom, it's built right into the word. It's really about teaching people how to build a business that empowers their quality of life, that makes things better and gives them financial freedom. That said, that would be, let's say, the surface level offering that I'm really focused on. But you're absolutely right. Underneath the whole thing, it absolutely has to do with resilience, and it has to do with being unfazable whenever possible. And I can't pretend that I'm unfazable all the time, but I certainly think that if you're going to do big things in the world, one of the things you have to work on is making sure that you're not so easily triggered. Excuse me.
Bless you. Bless you. Yeah, and the triggers, right? And the triggers can offer so much beauty, but in situations where you really need to find that part of you that can go, like I always think back to Speaking Academy, where you teach us to be the no problem speaker, right? No problem. And what that means for those of you listening is it means that you can get thrown anything where you were said to speak for an hour and now it's a half hour, no problem, right? So it's all these different things. And I really love that, because you can shine in those moments when you can feel the trigger and then respond rather than react to it. So I love that you do that for us.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, we get this feedback quite a lot, but it's like when we've run people through that process relative to speaking, like it's not just, hey, they might cut your time down. It's what if your microphone turns off, or what if the slides don't work, or what if you have a heckler in the audience? And if you get to the place where you are unfazable, where you are the one person that can maintain the audience's attention and maintain the bubble of experience they're in, no matter what else is going on. Well, first of all, you become an unbelievably valuable speaker, because that's magic. But then the next version of it is that you begin to recognize that it carries into your life. It's like, well, hold on a second now. Do I want other people to be able to make me mad? right? Like I
Mm.
remember years ago having a conversation with a very, very close friend. And when we were much younger, I was the more loud and aggressive and shouty one if we were having an argument about something. And he was the more passive, quiet, sullen, or even sulky version, right? But as I matured and he matured, we figured different strategies. And one day we got into quite a serious argument about something. Like we're very, very close. We may as well be brothers. And we got into a very serious argument about something. And I had passed through that phase of raising my voice in arguments, so I wasn't doing that. And then he started raising his voice. It was such an interesting role reversal. And I go, "Why are you shouting at me?" And he goes, "You're making me shout at you." And I'm like, "Well, hold on a minute now. What do you mean I'm making you shout at you? I'm not making you do anything. I'm just saying things, and then you're creating a meaning and you're responding. It's not like he needed to speak over top of me." And I think about that type of thing a lot, that we very often give other people the power. "Oh, you're making me mad. You're offending me." One of my favorite expressions that came up for me, I don't know if it was said previously, but it came into my head as an original thought during in early stages of the pandemic. I wrote this thing on social media, and it was like, the easier you are to offend, the easier you are to control. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, right? So when we talk about resilience, it's really the ability to choose your response. One of my favorite books, I believe it should be required reading to become a sapien. It's like, oh, you're going to be human? Here's the book. You got to read this book. And that book would be Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And, Viktor Frankl, for people who aren't familiar with the book, was a Jewish psychotherapist, living in Germany in an inconvenient period of history for Jewish people to be living there. And he ended up going off to Auschwitz for 4 years and what have you. And one of the things that he discovered in that journey was that the way he put it is that man's last ultimate freedom is the freedom to choose your response. He made this observation that while the guards had more liberty than him to come and go and be with their families while he's trapped in the walls, the guards living in the Nazi regime did not have the freedom to think their own thoughts, whereas he did. And that has always stuck with me, that I think a big part of resilience is having the ability to turn your consciousness on to shortcut unconscious response.
Mm. Oh, I love that. I'm like getting chills all over because it is so true. Like when you blame anybody, when you are looking to somebody else to make you happy, to make you feel a certain way, whether it's a higher vibration frequency, like, I want to feel love, I want to feel joy, and I have to only feel it through, what I'm receiving from somebody else. Or even if it's a lower vibration, like the anger that your friend experienced, you're giving your power away.
Yeah.
Truly. You give your
Yeah.
power away to everybody. And I think that that's a part of what happens in this world and why people get into anxiety and why people get into these feelings of like depression. It's because you're constantly looking for outside sources to make you feel, in general.
I think there's another big influence, and that big influence is that, look, you might imagine that if you took an elephant or a family of elephants from the Kruger National Park, where they have to compete with other elephants, they have to contend with poachers, they have lions and hyenas trying to eat them, like they live a very tough life in there. And you might make the assumption that if we took them and we put them in a really good zoo, where they wouldn't have poaching, they wouldn't have lions to deal with, their food would be regularly provided, they have access to a vet, you might make the assumption that they would live longer with all those threats removed. But the fact is they don't. They live much shorter lives in captivity than they do in the wild. And I bring that up because I think it relates to something you just said. And that was, these increased rates of depression and anxiety and what have you. And I think that one of the reasons that we're experiencing that is that we are very much like those elephants. We were removed from nature and put in the zoo. And we're not very good at that. So, we're told what to eat, and and we're told how to live, and we've got constraints upon our behavior, and we're removed from nature. We don't spend much time, outdoors in the sunlight with water. Like, we've broken our connection. And I think that in a very real way, we're lost. We know we're lost, but we don't exactly know why we feel lost. And so, and to put this in perspective, people today claim to be having anxiety and having anxiety attacks. Really, you're living in the safest time in the history of ever. You have hot and cold running water. You have a porcelain toilet. You have toilet paper. You have anesthesia, antibiotics. You have 911 or 999, depending on where you're living. You can instantly get help if there's some kind of, you live in the crimes against people generally are way less than they ever have been in history. Crimes specifically against children are half of what they were in the 70s. Women have greater equality today than at any point in time on earth. We are living in the very best times in the history of ever, and yet people are having anxiety attacks and depression. And I don't want to diminish the fact that they're facing very real things, but those very real things are not nearly as real as the stuff their great grandparents faced. And I think that one of the challenges we're having is exactly that. Life has gotten, in a sense, too easy for us here in the zoo, and we're not very good at that.
Wow. That's an amazing way to look at it. Yeah. I'm trying to take this all in right now. It's true. It is easy, yet it feels so much harder. And I think that in the ease, we focus on things that maybe we never had to really focus on before, or this future of ours. Yeah. It really looks like we create these ideas of the future rather than focusing on the present. And I think that's what having all those freedoms, would you say, like, having all those freedoms kind of leads to that? It's almost like you have more time to think about the future rather than being in the present moment.
Yeah. Suddenly you've got a greater capacity for imagination. And that could either go really badly or really well, depending on what you do with your imagination. So I often think of the evolution of imagination working like this. Before we had fire, there wasn't much time for imagining. Really, there wasn't. Like, you basically had to be out there gathering food every day, keeping an eye out for predators, watching out for other troops of proto-humans. Like, it was a scary time, and there wasn't a lot of thinking time. And then all of a sudden, one day, ancestors of ours figured out how to control fire. Long before they knew how to make it, they figured out how to control it. Like, oh, there's a fire over there. We now know how to move the ashes, and we can control our own fire. And all of a sudden, they had fire, and it meant that they could sit around and not worry so much about the predators anymore. And they could sit there in the warmth of the fire, and they didn't have to be vigilant, looking around, raising adrenaline, And in that moment, suddenly, imagination is born, or at least amplified. Suddenly they had time to daydream and to think, and that gives way, and it starts developing into storytelling. And that part of the brain begins to open up. And the ability to imagine is also the ability to anticipate. It's also the ability to invent. It changes everything when we suddenly have this freedom, right? The challenge is that we still ultimately have many of those sort of primitive thought processes. And here's one of the difficulties, is that the vast majority of human history has been absolutely terrifying. Really, like 99.99% of our history has been absolutely terrifying. And so we are easily frightened. We're very easily frightened. And so now, well, all you need to do is dial into CNN or Fox or Sky News or whoever you want. And what they know is that in order to keep you coming back, they need to frighten you. Because if you're frightened, you need certainty. And where are you going to get certainty? Well, from the news, because of the brand that newscasters created in the 60s, back when they told the truth, relatively. When you had Walter Cronkite and these guys really reporting news, so now there's this idea, oh, well, if you want certainty, go get the news. But the news companies have become basically thought drug dealers. And it's like, no, I'm here to sell you adrenaline. And that triggers stuff in a lot of us. So now you've got these people that, there are people like, look, we're not going to talk about politics, except we are, because here's the thing. I'm Canadian. I watch what's going on down in the States with this whole, Trump and Harris and Biden and all this kind of stuff. And what cracks me up, and I made a video about this a couple of weeks ago on Instagram, what cracks me up is that the individual person's financial future is much more dependent upon what they do every day than who's sitting in the White House. So like, you have these people having a complete meltdown about their economic reality. And the truth is, their economic reality is more affected by their decisions, their beliefs, and their actions every day than whoever's sitting in the White House. Now, I don't mean to diminish the fact that there are ideological things that people are freaked out about depending on who's in power one way or the other. But most people's lives on the whole won't really be affected that much one way or the other. And yet the media has turned us into a group of people where you have extreme people, say on the right, that believe that if the left were to win, that it's going to be a complete descent into full communism. And then you've got these extremists that are on the left, and they're terrified that if Trump comes into office, it's going to be the next Third Reich. Well, okay, Fourth Reich, but there's going to be a Holocaust of some kind. And now, when those people are that frightened, they turn on each other, and so what we're really dealing with is now there's almost too much time for our imagination, and we've got irresponsible people triggering that imagination in non-productive ways.
Yeah, and then they're creating these stories about each other, and then there's so much hate that came out of all of this. Like I really actually could not watch it. I'm not a political person in general, and I just couldn't stand all the hate that came out of it and all the finger pointing and all of these things. And it's like, I can't be friends with you. I had my dad lost a friend over it. I mean, it was madness. It was actual madness. And I saw it the same way, Eric. It's just like continuous of like giving your power away and realizing that all of these things, yes, it's going to affect some things, but at the end of the day, you have the ultimate control over your life.
Yeah.
Like, let's stop looking outside of ourselves for the control, for the fact that we create our reality. What is a reality that you want to see? Start to create it. Stop looking everywhere else. Stop getting distracted. Distractions.
I'll give you, it's silly, and I think we can move on from politics, but I just want to make this one point. It's like, first of all, there's a bunch of voter apathy. Half of the people don't bother voting, right? And then there are other people who vote and they really think their vote is going to make a difference. But I wonder what the percentages of those people that vote that have actually ever written to their MP or their congressman or written to their president, like how many of them actually gone to events, how many of them have gone to influence these things. And I think about that a lot because I've done those things. When I lived in British Columbia, I saw a headline in the newspaper one day that 5 people had died from a heroin overdose because some bad quality heroin had come into Vancouver, and it was front page news. And I'm thinking to myself, I wonder how many people died from tobacco today. And I looked up the number, and it was like BC was losing like a few hundred people a day. And I'm like, so 5 people is front page news, and yet a few hundred people a day is getting nowhere. So I wrote this letter to the health minister of British Columbia. I wrote this letter, multi-page, and all the science and I, all the chemicals that are in cigarettes. And then there's secondhand. I wrote this thing, and I was like, and I sent it off. And about a year later, British Columbia banned smoking. Now I have no idea I never got a letter back from them. I don't even know if they got it, but at least I felt like I'm not just this apathetic voter. I'm actually trying to do something to create change. Funny thing, some years later, I moved to England. And to my shock and horror, having lived in Vancouver without smoke for all these, I got to England and they were allowing smoking in restaurants. Can you imagine this? I was like, what? So I'm like, okay, we got to fix this right now. And so I went and got my old letter off the old hard drive and I cleaned it up. And boy, I was not a very good writer back then. When I looked at it, I was like, this could be way better. And I improved the whole letter and I bring it up to modern science and I send it off to 10 Downing Street to the Prime Minister's office. And I got a letter back from the Prime Minister's office saying that the letter had been forwarded on to the health minister, really appreciated it, blah, 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 and so on. 1 year later, they banned smoking. Again, not saying it was my letter, but I'm saying I felt involved in the process. And so all these people that are in panic stations, I'm going to leave the country if Biden is elected. I'm going to leave the country if Trump is elected. I'm like, oh, wait a second. Have you written a letter? Have you gone and met with anybody? Have you attempted to facilitate? In the last year, I have been at the British Parliament a dozen times. I've spoken in the House of Commons. I've in a private event on diabetes and obesity. I've met with I want to say maybe half a dozen or more parliamentarians. I've met with several members of the House of Lords. I am trying to do something, and I think that what people should do is stop with the anxiety and try to do something.
I love it. First of all, you're a master manifester. I'm just going to say that those letters, they they manifested. I feel like I hear so many stories of you, Eric, of like all the different things that you've manifested. I know we've talked about this in the past, but I love your manifesting stories. And I'm going to tell you something. You would be very proud of me because I actually got really, really mad one day because I was buying Pepperidge Farm oatmeal bread and I was buying it now for my kids. Right. I never looked at the back of the package before. And what made me do it this day, I don't know, but I was trusting. Like I'm a person that trusts easily. So I'm like Pepperidge Farm. Everybody like it has to be good. Like really like farm is in the name, right? So this is my thinking. And I turned the package over and in the bread that I was giving to my children, high fructose corn syrup. I'm going to tell you something, Eric. This threw me for a loop. The rage that I felt over this, I wrote them an email. And I'm going to tell you something. A couple months later, there was no more corn syrup in the bread. There was no more. I'm saying I'm taking full credit for it. Actually, I
Do it.
manifested it.
If you are anywhere near a miracle, take credit, at least some. I'm with you. And by the way, I want to make obviously I think a lot about food. I campaign heavily about food and the reversal of diabetes and obesity and all the other things that are related to that. And of course, one of the things that I speak a lot about is the evils of the food industry. I mean, there's very little question in my mind that when big tobacco realized their days were numbers, they started investing in food companies and they brought a lot of their disgusting practices over. But I'm going to say something a little unpopular, certainly unpopular for anybody who's been following me. The food companies aren't evil. They're just making what we buy. And yeah, I mean, sure, they try to manipulate it, but at the end of the day, if you stop buying it, they'll stop making it. Like and like just like your story, I had this woman tell me once. She said that she had learned through WildFit that she wanted to have seasons without carbohydrates, and she found out that the local butcher she was using, she wasn't a vegetarian, she liked to eat meat, so she was going to the local butcher and she was getting it responsibly, not from some grocery store, but like right, basically farm to table almost. But she found out that they were putting syrup in the sausages. And so she asked if they would make a batch, if she bought enough, a big enough batch, would they make a batch with her without sausages? And they did. And so for about, I don't know, a year, she would go in on a Friday and pick up her special batch and everything would be fine. And then one day she went to pick it up and the guy goes, we don't have your special batch anymore. She's like, what? Why not? He goes, because they're all like that now. What? He goes, we don't use syrup at all anymore. She's like, why not? Because we had another woman call us up and did this crazy WildFit thing and started asking us about syrup and the sausage. So then I went to my brother because and we're like, why do we put syrup in the sausage? Well, because Dad always. So we went and asked Dad, and Dad's like, well, because Granddad put the syrup in the sausage. And so of course, when Granddad was they were putting in natural syrups. By the time they got to it, it was gross syrups. But the fact is, the trend had come from way back. And so when they made this batch, the guy says, well, we made a batch for you. And we took a couple, threw them out on the grill, and they were amazing. And we're like, why the hell are we adding syrup to this? And they stopped. And so, be the change that you want to see. And this right now, people think that we're talking about food. We're talking about everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've mentioned WildFit multiple times at this point, and I want for those of you guys that don't know what WildFit is, I participated in WildFit. I loved it so much. I can't wait for Eric to explain it because he's created a movement. Obviously, you're hearing all the things. Spoke in Parliament, right? Is that what it's called? I'm sorry, I don't know
Yes.
the terminology. And about all these things. And he's really changing the face for the better. And I know many listeners that listen are very much into nutrition. So Eric, tell us all about WildFit, please, and how you came here, how you got to this moment.
Sure. I'll start here is that I came from a medical family. What I mean is that most of my grandfather was a surgeon, a bunch of my uncles, like it was a thing in the family, but in the meantime, I was sick. And I was very, very sick. And I wasn't like Make-A-Wish Foundation sick. I was just suffering a lot. I really I had terrible allergies. I had cystic acne that caused scarring through my neck. I had digestive problems that would lay me up where I couldn't even move. I was suffering. And I had visited, of course, coming in a medical family, there was a lot of advice around. try this, do that, go see this specialist. And I did all that. And all that ever happened was attempts to treat the symptomology. Nothing cured, nothing stopped, nothing erased. It was just suffering. And then I went to a friend of mine talked me into going to see Tony Robbins for the first time. This is back in like 1990 or so. And I went to go see Tony Robbins, and I was really blown away. I was there to learn about sales and learn about psychology and peak performance and all the stuff that Tony's really well known for. But what Tony wasn't really well known for at the time is health. And suddenly he started doing this like bonus session on food. And I watched that bonus session with complete fascination. Like, why is this dude with the teeth talking about food? I don't know. I came here to learn something else. But he'd been so compelling for the days before that I decided, okay, I'll give him the time of day. I'll listen. And I went home and I thought a lot about what he said. And I started doing some, research. I guess we're not allowed to call it research anymore because you're not allowed to do your own research apparently. But anyway, I started doing some research, and then I did an experiment, and I went 30 days and I ate less of this and ate more of that. And 30 days later, I had lost 35 pounds. And by the way, to do that at 21 years old, that's a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal anytime, but at 21, it's a really big deal because if you're already that far overweight at 21, you're headed nowhere good, right? And I was headed nowhere good. But more than losing that weight, my sinuses opened properly for the first time. My tonsils, they'd been chronically inflamed with strep throat throughout my entire, it was there, everything. I didn't have to have a tonsillectomy anymore. My entire life changed. I went to the doctor's office and I said, we're going for the checkup, and he's trying to convince me to still have this surgery. They'd ordered a tonsillectomy for me. And I guys, I don't think I need it. I don't. And he's like, oh, no, son, don't you, sometimes the symptoms go away and you don't want to end up on the waiting list. Cause of course, that's one of the great things about universal healthcare is you have to wait 6 months for surgery. So luckily for me, I had to wait that long because I was able to find the solution. But what struck me even then is that here I am walking into his office. I'm 35 pounds lighter. I look sufficiently different that my mother couldn't recognize me at the airport. My sinuses my acne's clear. Everything's changed. And he never once says, wow, you're looking good. Never once he says, how did you do that? I've been in there for years trying to solve these problems. The problems are gone. And he's not curious at all. Now, I don't think that he's representative of all doctors. And a matter of fact, I suspect that he was curious, but pride cometh before the fall. Mm-hmm. And he was too prideful to ask me what I had done. I think that's really what was going on. But that didn't stop me asking him something. I asked him because he's trying to push me to have this tonsillectomy. And I asked him, I was like, how long were you in medical school? And he told me, 6 years to become a medical doctor. And I asked him then how much of that time he had to study nutrition or food. And he told me none, like literally none. And for a fleeting moment, I made the incorrect assumption that he was the one MD that managed to skirt his way through medical school. He managed to cut this class and skip that exam. Somehow he snuck through. He's the one doctor. But it turns out that that's just how it is, that there is no requirement to study nutrition. There is no requirement to study food to become a medical doctor, which to me is about as insane as telling pilots they don't have to study landing. And that is the moment that gave birth to WildFit. I'll shorten the rest of it because basically over the next 20 some odd years, I read everything I can find. I go study archaeology. I get very interested in human evolution, and I unlock some thoughts about what would change everything. And it just as a hobby for me. And I start visiting with hunter-gatherer tribes in East Africa. The bow that hangs on the wall above me here was a gift from one of the chiefs of the Hadzabe tribe in East Africa that I've been visiting for some 15 years. And I arrived at a place where I really believed I'd found the solution. And the solution was that, there is a human diet. And while there are some modifications based on gender and lifestyle and some epigenetic expressions, the reality is there's a human diet. We all require the same vitamins, the same minerals, the same amino acids. Like there is one. And if you're close to it, you're healthier. And if you're far from it, you're less so. But where it really became a big thing for me was I tried coaching some of my friends. One in particular really hit home. He was very seriously overweight, and he saw what happened with me. And I told him what to do, and he did it for a couple of weeks, and he lost a bunch of weight, and he looked fantastic. And then he he just went back, and he just went back. And I started doing research, and I found out that that's how it works, that people go on diets and they gain weight every time they go on a diet. They damage their self-esteem every time they go on a diet. And then eventually they just give up. I basically did the same thing. I gave up. I was like, I'm not coaching people on this anymore. It's too frustrating to have the solution and have them not do it. I didn't like it. Years later, I'd now gotten into teaching. This is after the Tony Robbins tour that I did and so on. And my business clients kept asking me my secrets for health. And so I kind of decided that I'd share some of my principles with them. But the same thing happened. I'd share the principles with them and I'd bump into them 6 months later and they weren't better. And it was at that moment that I realized that another area of discipline for me had been the development of something we now call behavioral change dynamics, a system of principles and filters for the development of experiences, for developing transformative educational experiences. And I'd been applying this in my coaching practice and in my business school, which is why we've been so successful. As you've seen in our speaking academy, we use the principles there. Very, very successful, very, very effective. And I thought, why don't I do that with food? I mean, food, that's got to be the hardest behavioral change to simulate because it involves emotional addictions, physical addictions. It involves habits. It involves deep emotional connections with food. It's got to be the toughest thing in the world to change for people. And so I did it. I designed a 90-day journey for people that would take them through a series of incremental processes that would have them evaluate their psychology, really learn about their relationship with their conscious and unconscious mind, and also understand how the food industry has been manipulating both their psychology and their metabolism, and slowly work them toward what we call food freedom. And I tested it with 8 clients, and all 8 of them had phenomenal breakthroughs, which I thought was unlikely, but it also wasn't really very scientific because they were all clients of mine. So I had a high degree of, like they trusted me already. The question is, could I do this for the public? And so we expanded and started doing more and more classes, and it worked. And, eventually Vishen Lakhiani from Mind Valley came along, and he did the program, and it completely transformed his body. He then ran the program for all of his staff, and it completely transformed their business. And it even transformed their education platform. And then he published WildFit and helped expose WildFit to, just tens of thousands of people all over the world. And it's just been really, it's been the greatest honor of my life. I mean, the Canadian government summoned me down to Ottawa to present me with a medal. The Canadian Senate gave me a medal for the work that I've been doing. And since then, I've been amazed at the doors that have been opened. And frankly, the daily letters that I get from people writing to me about diabetes that they've reversed, and obesity that they fixed, and thyroid dysfunction that they've repaired, fertility, that babies that they never expected to have that they now have. I have to be one of the luckiest. I have to be one of the luckiest entrepreneurs on the planet.
And to be on the receiving end of this program is amazing. Like the way that I look at food now shifted drastically. Like I look at everything differently. I look at the back of packages, I'm reading, I'm trying to really truly understand why even it gets to this place where these things are in our foods. And I know it's become a huge movement, and I know that there's a law of resonance, right, Eric, where, you find something and then all of a sudden your brain focuses on it, right? So like, is it that I found WildFit and now I'm seeing the food movement change? Or is it that I found WildFit and then suddenly other people were finding it too, and it started to really create a movement? I believe that WildFit did create a movement. Like you see all of these people like petitioning, and a lot of people that I follow now on Instagram, social media, really petitioning like Kellogg's and like all these different things, and getting the crap out of the foods so that we can just eat clean, right? Like eat more clean. And obviously those things aren't part of WildFit, but I'm just saying like these are part of someone's diet, and to start to even just get rid of those things obviously is a great thing. But really looking at WildFit for what it is, it truly shifts your mindset around food, around what's in your foods, and the emotional, like psychological aspects of it, like completely change. Like I notice when I'm like crying, sad, and then after I'm done, like, a cookie sounds good right now. And then I'm like, no, a cookie doesn't sound good. You're the food devil.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the most exciting areas of exploration for me, is to really unlock those neuroconnections and those habits and the emotional linkages and stuff that we have to food. Because there's one that I really think people. I mean, here's one principle, and I imagine you remember this, but anybody could take this one principle and change their whole life about food, and that is that our emotions are like, let's say, a punishment and reward system. So if you feel shame, that's meant to feel uncomfortable so as to help you not to do that again, right? Like, oh, I feel shame when I do that, so therefore I won't do that again. Which is why it's not such a good idea to ignore your shame. It's a good idea to go into it and examine it, because then it serves its purpose and helps you develop as a human being. But then we have another set of emotions that are, say, more pleasurable. And those emotions are created by feel-good chemicals like serotonin and dopamine and so on. And those chemicals are designed to reward us for functional behavior. So let's imagine you and I are walking along 20,000 years ago, sub-Saharan Africa, and we stumble upon a bush with lots of ripe berries on it, and we start eating them. When we eat them, we're going to be taking in a bunch of great, natural, good, healthy sugars at the right time of year for what's going on around us. It's going to be amazing for us, and it's probably going to make the difference. I mean, if we eat enough of these berries over the next few weeks, that's going to help us get through the winter. So our body wants to reward us for finding those berries. So we produce a bunch of serotonin and dopamine, and that locks in the geographic memory of the bushes so that next year we'll be able to find them again. And it also locks in the behavior that led to the discovery of those bushes. So that way we will automatically, without thinking about trying to create a new habit, the habit will be created by the feel-good chemicals to a degree. Now, that has been a survival mechanism for a very long time. You and I see the bushes, we see the berries, we eat the berries, we produce serotonin and dopamine, we store the experience, we store the location, good for our survival. Now, you're upset about something and you're feeling that upset, and your brain goes, oh, I know where the cookies are. And then you go and eat the cookies, and then you produce a bunch of serotonin and dopamine and blood sugar rush. And your body goes, how did we find these? This is life-saving. And your body goes, oh, you know how we found these? We found these by sadness and depression. And so your body learns, okay, good. Next time we feel like we need some calories, next time we need a boost, all we have to do is trigger in the system sadness and depression, and we'll get there. So far from cookies curing the depression, cookies lock the depression in as a pattern of behavior. And so you have a bunch of people that are out there dealing with depression, and they're having red wine, or white wine, and they're eating ice cream, or they're eating bread, or they're eating cookies or donuts, whatever their go-to is when they're feeling down. And what they don't realize is any behavior or emotional state that you reward will be repeated. And so they're rewarding their depression with a bowl of ice cream. Guess what? Depression's coming back. And that's the type of thing that we really help people to understand. And we do it incrementally so that each week they get a greater sense of freedom. I mean, here's the deal. Nobody changes their diet on willpower alone. Okay, that's not true. A very small percentage of people changed it. My friend Lee in the UK years ago, I remember he read about Atkins and he used willpower and he changed everything. It can be done, but we know statistically that the vast majority of people cannot do that. And so what we have to do instead is we have to change how they think.
Yeah, and WildFit does that, and I love that incremental. And I think that if we face anything, because listen, let's be realistic. We're coming up on the new year where people starting to set intentions for themselves. They're starting to set resolutions, which I'm not a believer in. I like setting intentions, but people are starting to get ready to make shifts. And the thing is that they're going to make them all on day one. It's going to be like January 2nd. And they're like, all right, new year, new me. And the fact is that if you just jump all in to something like that, you're just like Eric said, willpower alone is really not going to get you there. It's not going to last. Right. So what WildFit does is it gives you things in incremental bite-sized pieces so that you can allow it to become part of your lifestyle. You can create it as part of your lifestyle rather than just be like forced to do it, because there's nothing that feels forced about it. For me, it did not feel that way at all. It felt very gradual. It felt very like a build up too. And I don't ever want to give anything away because I liked the surprise parts of it. I did like that. I looked forward to it every week. But there's a lot of beauty that comes with that because it helps you to maintain it after WildFit is
Yeah.
over.
Yeah.
After that section is over anyway, because you can continue, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was watching a talk that Vishen Lakhiani, the CEO of founder and CEO of Mindvalley, I was watching a talk of him, and he was actually speaking to an audience and breaking down what it is about WildFit that is so very effective. And he talked about that idea of incremental learning, but he also made another very, very powerful point about that, and that is that one of the things that WildFit does for people is it builds their let's call it their personal development self-esteem. In other words, what happens is that many people buy a program, say from Masterclass, and they think they're going to become the next great actor because they bought this Masterclass, or they're going to become the next big, public speaker or what have you. But the reality is that they then watch the book and try to put it all in, or watch the videos or read the book or whatever, and try to put all of that stuff into practice immediately. And as a consequence, they're uncomfortable. And this violates one of our behavioral change dynamics principles called frog in the hot water. They jump in, they jump right back out. And so what happens in our case, because we're using incremental learning, what it does is it allows every day to stack upon the next day, which creates a sense of progress. And progress is fundamental to human motivation. But it not only creates a sense of progress, it creates a sense of self-esteem because you completed it. We made it small and you completed it. Somebody reads a whole diet book and tries to go on a diet. By day 8, they're already cheating. Now they feel like a failure. Whereas if we said, look, don't do all that in week 1, right? Like take it incrementally. But the other point that he made that was really valuable to personal development was that WildFit causes people to mark out that, 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 minutes a day that they're watching the videos. And when the program is done, they have a self-improvement vacancy. They've made time for themselves, and it's become part of their personal constitution that they dedicate time to their education and their personal development. And that is partly why they are able to stick with it, because they continue to improve themselves.
Wow. So awesome. This is a transformational experience. I highly suggest it to anyone that is, honestly, to anybody, because we're all struggling here. I know that there is a struggle here. So anyone that feels like they can't get a hold on their nutrition, or they're like upset about the things that are in their foods, please give WildFit a try. You are going to love it. It will stay with you forever. It has stayed with me all these years. So Eric, thank you for all of the work that you put into that, and everything that you put into it. It's truly amazing, really.
I appreciate it. And I, like I said, I feel like the most fortunate entrepreneur ever, because I created it truly as a hobby, and it's just become so much bigger than that. So.
All right. Well, I want to, before we end this session here today, I really want to talk about Speaking Academy for a moment, because Speaking Academy was one of the best experiences of my life. And I know I post a lot about it, and I know that you guys were following along on the journey while I was there. And Eric, again, leads an incredible transformative experience through something that felt unlikely. And he said it on day 1, that it's not just about the speaking. This was a real, this only word I can think of is transformative experience, where for me, and you guys know, I'm always doing my work, I'm always doing my healing work, I hit a wall. I was really coming out of my comfort zone. Eric said some things to me that truly, I know when I reach the goals that are on my vision board, that I'm going to look back and say it was because of his words that he spoke to me during this time. So Eric, can you talk a little bit about Speaking Academy and about what goes on in this experience?
I think what I can start with is that people are often mystified by a great storyteller or a great public speaker, and they look up to them and they think how amazing it is, and they imagine that those people are naturals, that they were born that way. And so the first thing that I really want to make sure everybody understands is that either nobody was born that way or everybody was, and I'll explain what I mean. What I mean is that yes, there are some skills that need to be developed. There's no question. There are certain things you need to learn about how you be on the stage and so on. But the truth of it is that the ability to communicate effectively and to self-express is a natural born trait. Everybody was born with it. And the easiest proof in the world is just go fly with a 2-year-old and find out that no 2-year-old is afraid to express themselves on a plane ever, right? Something happens after 2 and before 32. And it's often a series of things, an overbearing parent, a difficult teacher, or just a series of unfortunate events. But what happens is that people become unwilling to put themselves out there. They become unwilling to, and they develop various levels of nervousness, public speaking. And then worse than that, there are some people that aren't that nervous of it, but they haven't learned the skills and they make it look bad. And then the people get more nervous about it. And, so I was like that. I was absolutely terrified of public speaking for most of my life. And I eventually came to a place where I didn't want to be trapped like that anymore. I didn't like leaving the scene of a conversation or a meeting and thinking, I wish I said this. I wish I'd said what was on my mind. I wish I'd self-expressed. I hated that feeling. And it turned out in the end that I hated that feeling more than I was afraid of public speaking. In fact, I bumped into, the word that Kirsty invented, scariosity, right? So
Yeah.
And I'll explain for the benefit of everybody is that my girlfriend is from Estonia, and she's every now and again when she's speaking English, she'll just kind of use the logic of English to just make up an English word. So one day she told me she had scariosity about something, and I said, "What is scariosity?" She goes, "Scariosity, because you know how it is. If people don't understand, you just say it louder, and then they'll understand. Like, it's scariosity." And no, Kirsty, I don't know all the English words, but I'm pretty sure that that's not one. And she goes, "Well, what do you think it means?" And I said, "Well, I think it means that you're curious about something, but you're also scared of it." And she goes, "There you go." And I realized she's right. It's a fantastic word. And so the truth is that if somebody doesn't have any fear of public speaking, it's usually because they don't want to do it at all. They're not afraid because they're not thinking about it. If somebody's on a plane, they're not afraid of skydiving because they're not thinking of jumping out. Right? So if you're afraid of public speaking, and this is a tough thing for some people to get, but if you're afraid of it, it's either because you're being forced to do it against your will or because you secretly want to. And that's really the case with a lot of people. And it turned out I was like that. I had scariosity. I was afraid and curious. And one day my curiosity got bigger than my fear, and I decided to overcome it. And I gave myself one of the greatest gifts of my life, the willingness, and then the ability, and then the competence to speak my mind, to present my ideas. And it didn't matter if it was, people or cameras. I decided that I was going to get that all done. And when I did that, it changed my life in unbelievable ways. That I wake up in my life often and pinch myself and think, how did I achieve this? I don't understand how I pulled this off. I'm living right now. I live in the Caribbean, where I've lived for the last 12 years on a beautiful house on the beach. I get to try. I have friends in almost every major city around the world. I'm blown away by the experiences that I've created. And I know that my overcoming my fear of public speaking has been maybe the biggest influence in my ability to do that. I created Speaking Academy to give that gift back to people, because I watch people, I see them, and I can see the pain they're in not expressing themselves. And I want them to be able to be heard. And so I did the same thing I did with food. I took our behavioral change dynamic structure and I turned it into a 5-day process. As you know, day one, very basic, almost boring even. And okay, not boring.
No, it was not boring.
No, not boring. But let's say a little more sedentary than what's on the way.
Yeah.
And incrementally, I take people through a deeply transformative process. And the most common feedback we get from people afterward is that they go, "Well, Eric, this isn't so much a public speaking course as this is a deeply transformative personal development program disguised as a speaking course." And I would say that's an accurate description.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it was really the content too, what that, it was of course about speaking and everything. It was in this bubble of speaking. However, there was so much there about energy where, Eric, you surprised and shocked me, because all of these years that I was following you, I didn't hear any of this talk. And all of a sudden I hear you. First of all, I saw a crystal bracelet underneath your shirt. And I said, "What is that, Eric?" And then, yep. And then I said, okay. And then you're talking about energy. And I learned so much about, of course, speaking, but I learned so much about energy, about the different practices that you do, about the different experiences that you had in manifesting. And the one that sticks out to me is like the different things that you wrote down, and the things that you and you just like throwing them out there. What about if I wanted to work with this person and that person? I don't want to tell your story, but and you started putting all this in, and then you realize that everything like came true. And I'm like, this guy over here, he is he's into the energy work, and I loved it. And I knew right then and there that there was a reason, Eric, that I liked you. I'm like, that's what it was. Can you tell us a little bit about like maybe give everybody one energy practice that would be great for them to maybe follow as this is the Spirit and Soul podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I want to address why it is that I sometimes operate in stealth. Um, First thing is, I really started meditating when I was 12. I wouldn't have known to call it that, but I was inspired by a TV show that I was watching where one of the characters could hold their breath as long as they maintained a certain meditative state. And so I started doing breath work and meditating at the age of 12, just mimicking this science fiction show. And, I developed all kinds of different things. Like I have this breathing exercise that I do, and this is a really fascinating one for people to try. Not on the first day, you can build your way to it, but where you breathe in for an entire minute and breathe out for an entire minute. And you do that for 10 minutes, which basically means you take 5 breaths over a 10-minute window. And I started doing that as a really deep dive meditation. And later it became really interesting because I did a lot of free diving. So it taught me a lot about my breath work and breath control for being able to do, I can dive to 90 or 100 feet. I can stay underwater for just a little over 2 minutes while swimming, but that started for me as a physical experience, but I very quickly tapped into it being an energetic one. And I'm going to add, do you know the story about my lake and the canoe? I don't know if you do.
I I don't know, maybe.
I'll share it because it does lead to a practice that I can share with everybody. So
I think I
I,
do know it, and I love this actually. I
yeah,
do, and I'm excited right now. Go.
okay, cool. I, I, um, I use something called meditation castles. And so these are it's basically, it's a little like playing a video game, like, one of these games the kids play where they build blocks and castles and stuff. They, like Roblox or whatever the kids are playing. And it's a bit
Mhm.
like that, but you build a real location and you become familiar with that location and you go to visit your location in your mind. And I find that to be a very powerful form of meditation because I find it grounding. And where it started for me was that I had seen this show, and on the show, as I mentioned, the guy could hold his breath for like almost indefinitely, sort of 20 minutes or something like that, as long as he could maintain a particular meditative state. And the way he did that was by visualizing a lake with very, very calm water. As long as the water was glass flat, he could hold his breath and keep his heart rate down. But if the water rippled, if he became disturbed and the water rippled, he'd have to come up for air. And I don't know where they got this idea from, but I remember the way they shot it and the way they showed it. And I started doing this visualization where I would go to this, weirdly, I would walk uphill and I would get to this lake and I would get in a canoe and I would go onto the lake and I would paddle across this canoe in my meditation and my visualization. But when I paddled, I would use something called a war stroke, which is where you put the paddle into the water, pull the water, turn the paddle, feather the paddle flat, and push the water silently back through. So there's no dripping. This is a silent hunting or war paddle stroke that was used by Native North Americans in the old days. And so in my meditation, I'd be doing this. And the idea was to cause no ripples on the water as I did this. And I did this from the age of 12. And then at the age of about 22, I bought my very first Jeep. Funny sidebar, I went into a Mercedes dealership because I was making all this money. I'd manifested and I was doing well. I went into the Mercedes dealership because I thought what I needed was a convertible Mercedes. And I figured out that I had enough money for the down payment. I could afford the monthly payment. I walked in, and because at 22, I looked about 15, they wouldn't let me test drive the car. They treated me so badly. They were so mean to me. And I walked out. I was like, I can't believe it. And there was a part of me that just wanted to go back and do it to prove to them I could. Luckily, that weekend, a friend of mine took me camping in his 4x4. And I was like, why on earth would you ever own a sports car when you can have a vehicle that goes anywhere? And so the next weekend, I took what would have been the deposit for the Mercedes and paid cash for the Jeep. And started exploring the mountains around British Columbia. I was living in Vancouver at the time, and I'd heard rumors about this one lake. And I managed to get this is before Google Earth. So I managed to get logging maps of this one area near what's called Sunday Summit. And I found where I thought this lake was on the logging map. And I went up there and I had my fishing gear and I drove up and I drove deep into the mountains on these old logging roads. And I get to where this lake is supposed to be. And it's like, it's not there. It's like a mountain in front of me. And I'm like, well, it says it's north of me. So I'm just going to go north. And I start going up and up and up and up and up. And then I realized that in my meditation, somehow I had set it up that I walk up to the lake, which is weird. You don't usually walk up to a lake, right? Lakes, except in the case of alpine lakes that are sitting in beds in the mountains, right? And I start walking up this, I'm going up and I start smelling water. It's a funny thing when you're in the forest, right? You can smell water, and I smell it. And I come up the crest and I start having the most powerful sense of deja vu that I've ever had. And it was not even like deja vu. It was like, I've never thought of it this way. It was like the opposite of deja vu. Deja vu makes it feel like you're walking into the echo of a memory or something like this. Now it feels like I'm walking into the moment that created the original memory. Like it was unbelievably powerful energetically. And this is the part that's, Tiffany, for you and your followers, they're just going to go, well, of course. But for me, shockingly, the canoe was there. The canoe that I've been paddling on, it was there. This is in the middle of nowhere. There are no cabins on this lake. There are no humans. There are no car traffic. Nobody's been there. Like, they haven't been there for weeks. If they have, somebody at some point has hiked this canoe up here so they can go fishing, and they left it here. But what? How is it here? And I look at I have goosebumps telling you this story again.
I'm getting chills all over.
And so I get in this canoe and I paddle out onto the lake, and it's the same lake, the same layout. And so I've now been to my lake, and I still visit that lake. I did visit that lake regularly. I even took my dad up there to go fishing once, months later. But what I eventually did in my meditation practice is I now take the canoe to the far side of the lake, and then I hike up again. And there's a clearing up there where I built a structure. And the structure is loosely modeled on a boarding school that I went to when I was in my early teens. And inside that structure, there are rooms that are dedicated to certain things. So there's the nap room. And I use the nap room when I am short of sleep, I need to be on stage, maybe I've been traveling, whatever the case might be. I use the nap room. I go into a meditation, I cross the lake, I go up to the castle, I go into the nap room, I set the alarm on the nap room for 20 minutes, and then I sleep inside the meditation for that 20 minutes, which is actually only 2 minutes in this world. And I can tell you, I come out of it rested. I just do. I come out of it feeling rested. And I have a seminar room. And I go into the seminar room when I want to think about content that I'm producing, a new talk that I'm producing, or a new training program. And the seminar room, it's a little like sci-fi like, but it can be a small, intimate boardroom, or it can be a stadium with 10,000 people, depending on the energy that I'm trying to create relative to that talk. And then, okay, you're going to like this room the most, Tiffany, but there's this one room, and it has a old CRT screen, the green kind. You're probably too young to even know what I'm talking about, but with the green text, right? And it has a keyboard, a clickety clackety old style keyboard. And this is the manifestation room. And when you walk in, you write, "Wouldn't it be nice if?" And then you just finish that sentence into the computer. "Wouldn't it be nice if?" And you finish the sentence. And you're basically sending, you're sending requests off to the universe in a detached way, not like a toddler. "I really want this. I need to have it." No, just, "Wouldn't it be nice if this?" And I've been doing that for most of my life, and that's one of my favorite meditation practices ever.
The story is really getting me right now. I love all of this. I love the meditation practice. I actually have been using the nap room, not yours, obviously, my own. I've been using that, and it works, guys. Let me tell you something. It works, because there have been a lot of times, especially when I have a live sale every Monday night. And then when I have things early on Tuesdays, I have to I'm short on sleep. And I find myself using this on Tuesdays quite often. And it works. It's amazing
It really does.
where you can go. And that story of the lake, it gets me every time. And I love that you realized what we would say is that that's a timeline that you had already opened up,
Yeah.
that you just went back to. So I love that you experience almost like this time travel, if you will, experience. So that's amazing. Wow, Eric, thank you so much for this conversation. Go
There's
ahead.
another
Did,
there's
yeah.
another really cool room that you maybe I've already shared this with you, but you certainly it's really worth applying, and that is that there's a boardroom, or the seminar room can be turned into a boardroom. And when I go into the boardroom, there's a big table, and whoever is around the table is who I need to be there. And so if I'm, for example, going to be asking, investment questions about what I want to do with the next, I might put Warren Buffett at the table. I might put Elon Musk at the table. I might put, somebody at the table. And then I have a conversation. And I can tell you that sometimes the people around the table are people I knew, which means you can put me at your table. And I, as an example, and I did that. One of my mentors was like a second father to me, Art Smolensky, and just an incredible man, and just, changed my life in immeasurable ways. And then I had a business deal, and I was really perplexed about it. And I went into the boardroom and I asked him about it, and he was away. I couldn't get a hold of him. So I asked him in the boardroom about it. And, I got this answer, and I decided to act upon this advice. And when he came back from his trip, I asked him what he would have done in my situation, and he gave me the same advice. And, I'm not going to say that this is a perfect system, that it would work every single time, but I feel certainly, because I knew him and we already had a tight energetic connection, it put me in a position where I could sort of tap into my perception of his consciousness and generate good advice or generate a good answer.
Mm. That's amazing. I actually, I often will call on you in, maybe I don't do it as a boardroom, but I think I might start, but I will often, especially right before I'm about to teach a class or speak, I will step into your energy, if you will. Someone taught me that.
I'm very honored.
um, yes, I always do. Eric, thank you so much for this conversation. It was truly enlightening. I'm so just honored that you spent some time with us today, and really thank you. Eric, how can everybody follow you? How can everybody see all the things that you're doing?
I manage my own Instagram account, which I take some stick for that, but I do. And so, that's probably the easiest place to follow me. And even, I even respond to people when they DM me. So,
He does.
people have questions, I do my best. The link in my bio right now actually is a link to try the WildFit program. And so if anybody's interested in dramatically improving the relationship with food, they can go there. They can also go to getwildfit.com or www.eric.ee.
Love it. Eric, thank you again so much. And truly just inspired by the things that you do. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's been an honor so far, our journey together, and I can't wait to see where it takes us next.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, guys, listen, I want to hear from you. What was your biggest takeaway from this episode? What did you really just like? What lit your heart on fire? What was your biggest aha moment? Make sure that you reach out to us at Spirit and Soul Studio on Instagram, and reach out to Eric. Talk to him. Tell him what your biggest takeaways were. Make sure that you're following everything that he's doing. And of course, thank you as always for joining us on this episode of the Spirit and Soul podcast. We'll see you next time.